What up, everybody? Welcome to this brand new episode of the 715 Green and Gold Tailgates podcast as part of the Man Cave podcast brought to you by Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Dan here with you. As always, a big thanks for tuning in. And, well, the NFL season is now officially in the books with the Philadelphia Eagles taking down the Kansas City Chiefs 40-22 last night. The Eagles, halftime, up 24-0. And, I mean, really didn't look back there. Again, if you didn't see the game and you didn't watch it and you're looking at the box score and you're like, oh, okay, Mahomes was 21 of 32 for 257 and 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Not, so awful. It was pure domination from the Eagles. Trust us. It was pure domination from the Eagles defense. Pick six. Getting after Mahomes 6 times, sacked 6 times, never looked comfortable out there. They were never able to get the running game going. Mahomes leading the team in rushing with 4 carries and 25 yards. But Chiefs, give them credit too. They stopped Saquon. Saquon just 25 carries for 57 yards, but Jalen Hurts was beating them all over the place. 11 carries for 72 yards, including a touchdown, the first touchdown of the game, and then 17 of 22 for 221, 2 touchdowns, and that pick that was towards the end zone. But spreading the ball out, Devontae Smith, 4 catches for 69 and a touchdown. A.J. Brown, 3 catches, 43 and a touchdown. Dotson, 2 catches, 42 yards. Saquon, 6 catches and 40 yards. Zach Bond, former Badger, having himself a game as well. Leading the team with 7 tackles. Also picking up that interception deep in Chiefs territory. Josh Sweat could have made the case for him, maybe getting MVP of that game. 2.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits. Milton Williams, a guy that a lot of Packers fans are maybe hoping they can acquire in free agency. He also had 2 sacks and a couple of TFLs, and then Cooper DeJean. Again, a lot of Packers fans wishing Green Bay would have drafted him in the last draft. He is the one with the pick 6 in the game last night. But you look at this, and I know Jalen Hurts won the MVP, and you look at his offensive numbers and such, and the man played a really solid game, going 17 of 22 for 221, 2 touchdowns, interception, then running the ball for 72 yards and getting a touchdown too. But you could have probably picked, Josh Sweat. If you could give the MVP to a coordinator, I would have given it to Vic Fangio last night, because his game plan was on point. I mean, Fangio was just absolutely dominating, and give credit to the players as well, executing that game plan. They were just lights out, and it started up front with that defensive line unit. Again, I'll throw this crazy stat out there from Pro Football Focus, this crazy nugget. Pass rush from the Eagles. If you were watching that game, you're like, man, they must have dialed up some blitzes and exotic stuff and all that. 0 blitzes, 26 pressures, 6 sacks, 42.9% pressure percentage. That is unreal. Unreal. Dudes were dominating at the line of scrimmage. And if you know your Eagles teams, or you just, paid attention over the last few years, and Howie Roseman, general manager for the Eagles, what does he do? He invests a lot in 2 things, defensive line and offensive line, especially defensive line over the years when it comes to the draft and such. And boy, has that worked out so much for him, and it showed in this game against the Chiefs last night, just making Patrick Mahomes so uncomfortable back there. I mean, Brady talked about it how many times with Mahomes' footwork and, just not looking comfortable back there. And why would you be comfortable back there when the Eagles were just terrorizing up front and winning their one-on-ones and just absolutely dominating? And remember, the Chiefs have a couple of all-pro Pro Bowlers up on that offensive line too. So I mean, it was a clinic. It was a clinic from that defensive line front from the Eagles. And if you spin it to, okay, Green Bay is a team that faced the Eagles twice this year. Eagles are now Super Bowl champs. How many pieces away are, in your opinion, are the Packers from dethroning the Eagles, who are now the champs, to being at that same level? Where would you? How many pieces do you think Green Bay's? Do you agree with Jacobs, where he threw a number out there at 3? I think, again, you start off with defensive line. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a wide majority of Packers peeps, Packers fans, all, I think, believe the same thing. The biggest priority, or at least the top 2 priority for Green Bay, is going to be defensive line. You hear Matt LaFleur, you heard him say it after, in his season-ending presser, when he was asked about what were some of your expectations for your defense, for your new defense this year, and he made a note to mention getting home with 4. And you hear Halfley talked about it at various points in the season and such. But you saw the example last night why the Packers and a lot of teams want to get home with 4. It allows you to do so many different things. You get pressure with 4, you're keeping extra dudes back in coverage, and you're limiting yes, there's quarterbacks that can beat the pressure, that can beat the blitzes and such. A lot of those quarterbacks don't have to deal with, 7 back in coverage. And credit to the Eagles, they were able to get that pressure and force those turnovers. Cooper DeJean, Zach Bond, looking at that's where I think the next thing is that Packers fans want to see when it comes to their defense. The defense made a lot of strides for Green Bay this year. There's no question about it. But now I think we can all agree that that's the next thing we want to see in the progression of this defense. That's the next thing. We want to see guys getting home, winning their one-on-ones, not always having to bring extra blitzers or extra pressure and leaving guys maybe on an island back in the secondary. Because if you're going to go up against really good quarterbacks, they're going to be able to pick that apart more times than not. But Philly was able to get home with their 4 and just wreak havoc against the Chiefs last night. So there's no question Green Bay's defensive line and Philadelphia's defensive line not on the same page, not in the same area code, not in the same class, not even close. And if you were one, or you are one, banging the table for Green Bay to go out there and get more defensive line help, you'll look at last night's game and you say, right there, see? Like, I was watching that game last night, and I'm sitting there thinking, Goody, I hope you're watching. And I hope you're watching what Howie Roseman did with that defensive line group over the last couple years. And again, I think for a lot of people too, a lot of Packers fans who talk about the first-round picks, you look at what the Eagles and Howie Roseman has drafted in the first round over the years compared to Green Bay's philosophy when it comes to first-round picks. But you look at just this past year, okay? Mitchell, their corner, big-time part of their defense this year. Rookie corner, big-time part. Cooper DeJean was a second-round pick, 40th overall. Believe they traded up, moved up a few spots to get him. Could be wrong, but I believe they did. Guys that had huge impacts this year. The year before, you had 2 first-round picks. Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith, who was a big-time player before he got hurt. But Jalen Carter, we know the havoc he was going up there. The year before that, another defensive lineman, Jordan Davis. And then 2021, Milton Williams in the 3rd round. I mean, they invest up front. They're big-time investors up there, but their first early picks, they're guys that are thrown in right away and asked to be big-time contributors. And more times than not, they're big-time contributors, for crying out loud. I mean, I've got the Eagles draft list up here. Howie Roseman has done a fantastic job. You got Mitchell, you got Cooper DeJean as your top 2 picks these past year. I mean, you got Hunt over there, who's a third-round pick defensive end. Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith the year prior, Jordan Davis, Cam Jurgens, Nakobe Dean in 2022, 2021, Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson, Milton Williams. You look at 2020, and it was like, that's the Jalen Reagor one, which is kind of the eyesore over there where, you know, I know teams and the Vikings were kind of making fun of. You just imagine if the Eagles would have gotten Justin Jefferson over there too. It's like, geez Louise. You know, man alive. But guys who are impact players, early picks, it doesn't matter that they're a rookie. They're drafting guys that can have an effect and be impact players on their team right away, especially defensive players. But, man, I hope Goody was watching that game last night and be like, yep, we need to get some defensive line help. We need to get some rushers. We need to get some guys that can dominate in the trenches. And I hope guys like Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary and Devontae Wyatt and guys who are going to be on the team this upcoming season took notice too what it's going to take to go the next level. To not just get to the postseason, but to win in the postseason and to win a Lombardi trophy. All the changes throughout the years in football with the flashy plays and the big plays and, you know, speed at skill position players, a lot of it is still won up in the trenches. Still up in the trenches. Getting pressure on the quarterback. Taking out the running game. I mean, boy, what a just absolutely fantastic job by the Eagles last night. I mean, you can look at, too, you know, if you think corner's another need for Green Bay or more defensive back help, you could probably look at last night's games, too. We mentioned Cooper DeJean. We mentioned Mitchell as a big-time player this year for the Eagles as a rookie. I mean, you had 2 rookies in the secondary this year. 2 rookies in the secondary this year being impact players for this team. Mitchell as a rookie started 16 games this year. Cooper DeJean didn't initially start right away, but an impact player. Ended up taking that starting role. He played 16 games this year. Started 9 of those. Technically started 9 of those. But 2 defensive backs, the Eagles. What did they do? So Vic Fangio, if you know a little bit of history of Vic Fangio loves his corners, loves his defensive backs. And I remember with the draft last year, when Green Bay didn't get Cooper, I'm like, oh, that's an Eagles guy. I think I even had Cooper mocked the Eagles in the first round. But I'm like, you have Vic Fangio. He's a defensive backs kind of guy. It's like Cooper was the perfect corner for him, and they ended up getting him in the second round. But what did they do? They drafted 2 guys. They had a new defensive coordinator coming in. You know what he wants to do. So what does Howie Roseman do? He's like, okay, this is what you need. This is what you want, or this is what's going to elevate our defense to a top-level defense. Okay, we're going to try to get you to these 2 guys, and they did it. But you look at the Eagles overall this season, you look at, you know, some of their defensive backs in their secondary. Yeah. I mean, secondary made strides for Green Bay. There's no question. Xavier McKinney was a huge boost. Evan Williams as a rookie showed a lot of promise. But you're probably not going to have Jair next year. You're probably going to open up the season with Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine as your top 2 unless they bring in somebody else. Javon Bullard was okay as a nickel guy. You need more corners. You need more depth at that spot, and you're probably looking at last night's game too. I'm like, yep, that's another thing Green Bay needs. So that's probably piece 2. Probably need a couple defensive linemen, but we'll just count that as 1 right now. And if you want to make the case for a veteran wide receiver, maybe you can make the case from last night's game. You look at the Eagles, A.J. Brown's a veteran receiver. Devontae Smith's a little bit younger. I mean, 2021. Got his big deal, was it this past year? But you're probably looking at it like, oh, they had a couple of wide receivers there, and Jalen Hurts, when they needed some big throws or they wanted to be aggressive, he went to his veteran receivers, and they made some plays. Ticky-tack foul on A.J. Brown in that opening drive, in my opinion. But maybe if you're one that is the mindset of they need another veteran receiver to help out that wide receiving core, a guy that, kind of a go-to guy, maybe you can make the argument of, well, look at what the Eagles last night did too, It was Chiefs did a fantastic job of slowing down Saquon, and Jalen was able to hit some of his receivers. Jalen, though, also got to give credit to Jalen Hurts for this one, for a lot of things last night, but this in particular, when the Chiefs tried to get pressure on him, tried to make a play, Hurts had that sixth sense going last night. I mean, it was perfect timing. Whenever they got back there in that backfield, he just stepped up and scampered and picked up big-time first downs. I think it was it Bolton? There was a Chiefs linebacker who was on one of them. He just turned to the sideline and threw his hands in the air like, what do we do? They got the pressure on Hurts, but he sensed it and timed it so perfectly that he just ran up the middle and gained a huge amount of yards. So, and you can look at offensive line too. If you want to look at the offensive line, look at offensive line play. And maybe that's your argument, like this is why I want them to focus in bringing back Josh Myers next year to keep that offensive line as a cohesive unit and to have some depth over there. Look at Philly's offensive line. Jalen Hurts got sacked a couple times, 2 sacks for 11 yards. Total quarterback hits, though, on Jalen Hurts was just 3. Total quarterback hits against Patrick Mahomes, 11. So, again, and I mean, Philly's got the biggest offensive line in the entire league. Height, weight, the biggest dudes. So if you're one saying this is why I want them to keep Josh Myers, I want them to lock up all their guys and get some depth over there, you can look at last night's game too and say, see? So there's a lot, that was just 4, right? 4 different areas we kind of touched on. How many pieces do you think Green Bay's away? I think when Josh Jacobs says 3, I think he's probably right there. But also, what I think this Eagles team showed this year, to relate it back to Green Bay, is Green Bay can get this thing right. They can add a couple pieces this offseason and be in this position that Philadelphia is in right now, Super Bowl champs. Green Bay can do the same thing. I think if you're a fan, this is what you got to hope for. And I think maybe this is what we should expect coming into the 2025-26 season. Philadelphia, at the end of last year, the way they finished that season, limped into the postseason, losing their wild card game against Tampa Bay. And you had people calling for the firing of Nick Sirianni, and it almost felt like it was going to happen. You didn't hear anything from the Eagles for a while. Like, it was just like, okay. So they bring in 2 veteran coordinators. One's going to be leaving. Kellen Moore's going to be the Saints' new head coach. So it'll be interesting to see who they bring in offensively to replace that, maybe promote from within, who knows. But they bring those guys in. Howie Roseman brings in Saquon, drafts incredibly well, and look at the instant turnaround that this team had. Green Bay is in a position to do that too. And I think if you are a fan, you're hoping for that, you're expecting that. It's not like Green Bay is so far behind the 8 ball from Philly. They're not leaps and bounds behind them. If we're using Philly as that benchmark because they are now the champs, you got to dethrone the champs, right? If Green Bay has a solid offseason, if they add a few pieces, they draft well, but draft players that can be contributors right away. Green Bay can be in this position this time next year. They're not that far off. It's just the biggest question is is Green Bay going to be able to hit on some of those decisions? Are they going to be able to be, or are they going to be as aggressive in some situations like Philly tends to be? Not always the kid, doesn't always work out in some of their decisions, some of their moves, like drafting Jalen Reagor. Hey, Philly's got a Super Bowl championship before JJ, though. Justin Jefferson, since that draft. So I think if you're a Packers fan, you look at where Philly was last year at this time. Question marks surrounding their team. Question marks surrounding their coaching staff. Are they going to restart with a new coach? They didn't. Brought in reinforcements. A year later, they're the champs. The biggest question now is going to be, can Green Bay emulate some of that success in the offseason? It's not necessarily winning the offseason is going to win you a Super Bowl. And at that point in time, did Philly have when free agency opened and such, was Philly maybe a team mentioned right away as like, ooh, wow. Saquon one was a big one, right? That was a big one. But you also factor in some of the draft moves that they made and the coordinators. You factor that in the offseason. Yeah, Philly had a fantastic offseason then. Green Bay is just a few pieces away. But they can get those few pieces. I know it sounds like when we say few pieces or a couple pieces away, it may sound like it's a lot. They can get all those pieces this offseason. They can get some more defensive line help. They can get another defensive back. Maybe bring in a receiver. Get some impact players right away in the draft. Guys that you can throw out there day one. Maybe not necessarily drafting a guy. If you're serious about competing for championships, quote unquote, maybe not getting a guy where you think, okay, he may not be ready right away, but the ceiling's very high. We've done that. Maybe try to get a guy that, all right, we know we could throw him out on the field on day one, or he can be a part of that rotation day one. So I think Green Bay's a couple pieces away, few pieces away, but they can go into this offseason like Philly did last year, change it around and hit the ground running. It's just, will they? That's the question I have. Will they actually do that this offseason? What say you, Packers fans? Do you think they're that far off? Do you think they're just a couple pieces away? Do you think, no, you guys are crazy? They're towards the bottom. They're nowhere close to where the Eagles are right now. Not even in the same area code. What do you think? Okay, we got to see Packers-Eagles twice this year. Once at the first game of the season, second in the postseason. Eagles are now champs. How far do you think they are? Are they leaps and bounds and mountains and valleys and lakes and rivers and oceans behind the Eagles? Or, hey, we're just a couple pieces away. Few pieces away from this thing. I think it goes back to something that we talked about, was it last week or the week prior? But I think it's a very big offseason and a very important offseason for Green Bay. And I think when you have your general manager, Gutekunst, going out there in his season-ending presser and stating, I think it's time for us to compete for world championships, you have, maybe it was on purpose, maybe it's inadvertently, but you have put the pressure on yourself, you put the pressure on your coaching staff, and you put the pressure on your players like, okay, now we go. But it starts with the general manager now. This is the general manager season. Okay? This is Goody's season now. It's free agency. It's the draft. This is where he's got to fill up that toolbox with the proper players, with the proper items, with the proper tools to compete for now a championship. If your general manager is going to go out there and claim that it's time for us to compete for championships, you're up first. Because it's the off season. It's the general manager now who's up. What are you going to do? What part are you going to play into this? How are you going to help your team now compete for those world championships? Starts with free agency next month. Starts with the draft in April in a couple months. What are you going to do? Then it goes to the coaches, and then it's up to the players. But now it's Goody's time. This is Goody season. Let's make it Goody season. Let's make it. And it's not to say, just to go out there to make moves. How many times have we seen teams do that and it's fallen on their face? Jets, right? So, not necessarily win the offseason, but make moves that I think a lot of us like, oh, dang, that was a good one. That was pretty darn solid. It's got to be smart ones. So not moves just to make moves and to shell out some contracts and some big money and that sort of thing. But this has got to be Goody season. This is where the general manager, now this is his turn. This is his or her turn to go out there and put together a team that can compete for championships, that can be in a position. Because I one of these days, while I'm still doing this for however long it may be, I would love to be on a Monday morning and we're talking about a Green Bay championship. Now, I've been fortunate to see a couple of them. Haven't been able to be on this and when they've done it, though. And boy, that would be fun. I would probably be, not a lot of sleep and such, but man, I would love to do that. And I don't think we're that far off. But this has got to be Goody season now. And I hope he was watching. I would imagine he was watching that game last night. But I hope he's sitting there watching, be like, okay, yeah, I know what I got to do now. It's evident what I got to do. I got to go get me some guys up front, some horses up front, some beef up front, and just shred that defensive line, because I think you also have to factor in the division that Green Bay's playing. That division's it's going to be competitive. And you're going up against Jared Goff, whoever the quarterback's going to be in Minnesota. Hey, maybe it's Rodgers now that the Jets are going to move on from him. Caleb Williams with Ben Johnson as his new offensive coordinator. You're going to be going up against some solid offenses, right? Chicago's going to have an offensive-minded head coach. Minnesota is an offensive-minded head coach. We know what Detroit. It'll be interesting to see what Detroit does offensively going forward. But they got playmakers on that ball. So, let's maybe get some beef. Get some more horses in the trenches up there. All right, that is going to do it for us on this episode of the 715 Green and Gold Tailgate Podcast, again as part of the Man Cave Podcast, which is brought to you by Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Till next time, I'm Dan Casper. We'll talk to you on the next episodes of either the 715 Green and Gold Tailgate or Man Cave Podcast.